Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of our rebranded podcasts. Now and in the future, we will be focusing on nature and science. So Life is a Story We Tell Ourselves is now a journey through science and nature podcast. Speaking of nature, there's no greater representation of the beauty and grandeur of nature than America's national parks, along with its myriad of historical and cultural sites. Joining us on this episode is Will Shafroth, the president and CEO of the National Parks Foundation. As president and chief executive officer of the National Parks Foundation, Will Shafroth leads the organization's work to protect our national parks and connect people to these great places. Will oversees a staff of more than 125 that work to raise and deploy funds to support programs and projects in our national parks. He reports to a 30-member board of directors with whom he remains closely connected to advance the organization's mission. Prior to joining the National Park Foundation, Will served as Principal Deputy Secretary and Counselor for Secretary Ken Salazar at the Department of the Interior. He also served as Executive Director of the Great Outdoors Colorado Trust Fund and Colorado Conservation Trust, Assistant Secretary at the California Natural Resources Agency, which is where we met many, many years ago, and Chairman of the Land Trust Alliance and Resources Legacy Fund. As a fourth-generation Coloradan, Will's personal and professional lives have been centered around the conservation and enjoyment of public and private land. He's the father of 3 children and enjoys biking, hiking, fishing, canoeing, and racket sports. Will, my friend, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Don. Great to see you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you again after all of these years. Well, let's get right into it. The first question really has to do with your personal journey in conservation. So was there a particular instance during the course of your life that started you on your journey in conservation?
I was thinking about this earlier, and it really was sort of 2 tracks, Don. One is that, I grew up in a family of six kids, and my parents, we lived out in the country, so we were every day exposed to nature, snakes and red-winged blackbirds and swamps and, irrigation canals. And we were just like, we lived far enough away that we needed to be able to entertain ourselves. And that became in the outdoors. And my dad loved to ski and fish and hike in the mountains. So we did a lot of that as well. But I think married with that, sort of the exposure to the environment and gaining an appreciation of it, and also understanding how important it was for my physical and emotional and mental health. Our family had a long history in public service. So my great-grandfather was a member of Congress, senator, governor, and my grandfather served in the Roosevelt administration. My other grandfather was in the state legislature. My dad and uncle ran for, so there was just a long history of that in my family. And so when I went to study political science at UC Santa Barbara, I realized that I wanted to marry that with an environmental studies major, and it just felt like that was the perfect fit for me, marrying a passion of life with a focus on service.
Well, so it's really in your genes and in your blood. So you also went to the Kennedy School, didn't you?
I did, yes. 10 years into my career, I realized how deficient I was in certain areas, Don. And if I really wanted to enter, a senior level in government or a nonprofit, I needed to go back and understand how to manage an organization, financial management, operations, personnel, political management, which you and I got a master's degree in Sacramento. I can't say I passed all those classes, however, in Sacramento, but it was a great experience for me to be with a number of people in mid-career who I could learn from, as well as the great teaching staff there at the Kennedy School.
Well, you may not know this, but I think it may have actually been the same year. It was probably 1989. I had applied to the Kennedy School, got accepted, and but at the same time got promoted to superintendent of parks in California along the Big Sur coast, which is where I met our friend Michael Mantell shortly after he came in as the assistant secretary or deputy secretary for the Resources Agency. And so I always wanted to go to the Kennedy School and had many friends, but I had to make a decision. Okay, and as you said, where are we going to get our master's degree? Where are we going to get educated? In the trenches or at the university? So
exactly. I teach a class at UC Santa Barbara now, Don, in the Graduate School of Environmental Science and Management, and they wanted me to be a little bit of the, how do things get done in the real world kind of class. And so they're getting great students are amazingly bright and thoughtful and focused, but they don't have many offerings with people like me who've been in the trenches for 40 something years and have some scars and bruises to show for it, and give them a reality about how to actually get things done in the real world.
Yeah, that makes a big difference. Well, hopefully we'll discuss a few of those things as far as funding is concerned and supporting the national park. So my first question really has to do with the fact that you now head up the National Park Foundation. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the foundation so my listeners can get an understanding of what the foundation does and how it works?
Sure. The National Park Foundation was established back in 1967, Don, through action by Congress, and it really came out of a broader report on America's outdoors. It was initiated during the Eisenhower administration and really adopted during the Kennedy-Johnson administration, which led to a number of great initiatives around the creation of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the Wilderness Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, et cetera. And this was an example of thinking about this in a different way. And Lawrence Rockefeller, Lady Bird Johnson, and Stuart Udall really banded together to say, Americans love their national parks. Let's create a vehicle through which they can express that love, and through donations and volunteerism and things like that. And so we were created as the first such federal agency nonprofit partner to focus on people's connection to national parks and love of them. So we were at it for a long time, and honestly, I think the organization was finding its way for a long time, and I really give a huge amount of credit to my former boss, Ken Salazar, who was appointed Secretary of the Interior by Barack Obama in 2009. And he really saw the potential of this organization to really make a bigger impact on the park, help the Park Service do things that they were really unable to do or couldn't do as fast or innovatively or creatively. And so really saw that one power that he had was through the appointment of directors. And these are 6-year terms. And he put in place a great director, John Jarvis, to the National Parks, and who really shared this vision around a much more substantial and effective and impactful National Park Foundation. And it really, that started it. The foundation and the Park Service really got aligned for the first time around our mission and the role that the foundation could play to support the parks in specific ways. And it sounds like, oh, well, of course, but it wasn't really the case for the first nearly 50 years.
No.
And so we really work hard on that alignment. And it's not like we're going to do everything for the National Park Service, but we do those things that we're uniquely positioned to do and that we can raise money for, frankly. That's a key objective. And I think that starting in 2013, we really just started to hit a different stride. And we initiated a campaign that year that was started out at $250 million, and ultimately we raised $550 million to support.
Oh my God!
In a 5-year period of time, we're now in a campaign to raise $1 billion to support the parks, and I know we're going to exceed that in that time. So we're really trying to focus our time and attention on raising the funding and creating impact on the parks.
Well, that leads me to ask all this question was further down the line of my questions, but it's a good segue to ask you about the fact that many people, particularly when I was there working with the foundation years ago, of course, it was with a different administration and the politics were different, but we often heard, shouldn't the government be supporting parks? Why do we need a private entity to raise funds for parks? And I wanted to ask you, how challenging is it to get people to donate, whether it's corporate or individual, when some people believe that the government ought to be supporting parks and providing the resources that are necessary?
It's a good question. We do get that question a lot, and imagine. But I think that but like so many things that in our society, that the government funding isn't enough. It's really a team sport. It's at our local schools. It's not like parents don't volunteer. There aren't bake sales. There aren't opportunities to support the sports or arts or music, whatever it might be. That's really the plus up. And in the same way, we're not really funding the rangers and the superintendents. That is the government's job. What we're funding are the things that are really the over and above experiences around connecting young people to the parks. There's no requirement in the statute that we try to attract 1 million Title I fourth graders to our parks, but we see that as our purpose. There's something to be gained societally and for the mission of the Park Service if we can facilitate paying for the bus transportation and the lunches and the education that happens to the parks. That's a good thing. We also do things that are difficult for the government to do, and including land acquisition. You understand, having been inside, that there's a lot of process and procedure and that goes along with a project to buy land. And so we are able to, because of our relationship with the Park Service, is to work directly with the private landowners to negotiate a transaction outside of the public spotlight and hand those lands over to the Park Service when we're done. Great example of that is the birth and life home of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King in Atlanta, and I worked directly with Bernice King on that project, and we were in discussions for a couple of years until we got that done. And now those homes are part of our federal estate, and that the Park Service can now invest additional dollars into the restoration and manage the visitors in a more effective way that will allow that home to stay in good shape forever. In the same way, we recently acquired land to establish the Amache National Historic Site, which tells the story of Japanese Americans internment during World War II. And so those are unique roles that we can play. So what we often do, Don, is we put it through the but-for test. But for the National Park Foundation, this wouldn't happen.
Right. I understand.
So we're not trying to fall into the trap of paying for things that the government really has been and really continue to pay for. Right.
Well, that leads to another question that was way down my list, but a good segue, because I know you recently received a $40 million donation for park housing employee housing at Yellowstone, I believe.
Yes.
And how did that come about? Because I think that is, employee housing certainly is something that the National Park Service ought to be paying for, and the government ought to have a greater concern for its employees than it obviously has had. So how did that come about, and why did the National Parks Foundation get involved in that?
That's another great question, Don. We first of all, the other aspect of the question you just asked before this was that the overall budget for the Park Service is down from a net standpoint. They have basically a flat budget, or a 1% increase, or just last year a 1% decrease. Couple that with salary raises, things like that. The net effect is that there are fewer and fewer people working at the Park Service every year since about 2010, and so that's a reality. Yes, they have more money for deferred maintenance now. That's a good thing. They have maybe more money for land acquisition now. That's a good thing. But some of the other blocking and tackling that needs to happen within the park system just isn't happening. And so one of the things that we do with our board of directors, our national council, and other friends and donors to the parks is that we invite them on trips to the parks to learn about the various challenges that those parks are having. So we spent some time in Yellowstone last summer, 3 or 4 days, really touring around, understanding, issues related to the restoration of the Yellowstone cutthroat trout in Lake Yellowstone, having almost completely eradicated the lake trout from that, which is an invasive species. How to understand what's going on with the wolves and grizzly bears and moose in the park. So we got that piece of it. Frankly, managing bison is a gigantic thing regionally in that area. And so there's some things that they could do there. But one of the things that came through loudly and clearly from Superintendent Cam Shawley was that his biggest challenge is maintaining his employee base. The cost of housing around in the gateway communities like Gardner, Montana, have skyrocketed significantly because of Airbnb and VRBO, and that whole dynamic that people are no longer is letting their house sit there. They're renting it out every chance they get, and they're making a lot of money on it. And the cost of a house 25 years ago, when Rangers were looking to buy, was affordable, and something under $200,000. Probably today they're over $1 million. And
Right.
so for his employees to work, inside the park at Mammoth and have to commute from Livingston, Montana, is ridiculous. Or
Right.
to live in 50-year-old housing that is full of rodents and mold and other things, like that's just not acceptable. The people who work in these parks deserve a great place to live and a place they can call home. And so that story was heard by one of our donors, and they decided, really, we thought they might contribute $5 million, and when the superintendent said my total need is right at $40 million, they wrote the whole check.
Yeah.
It was one of those things that just the connection between mission and people really became inextricable. That link was just so tight, and he said, if we actually care about this place, we need to support housing more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. What a great story. So my other question is, I've been involved in, donations, people giving money, and one of the challenges is making sure the money goes where it's supposed to go.
Right.
So I'm really interested in knowing kind of what checks and balances will be put in place and what monitoring is going to happen to make sure that $40 million actually turns into employee housing.
Good point. Well, the Park Service has to go through lots of process and procedures to approve the actual housing plan, and that's gone through something called the Investment Review Board. We work closely with both the superintendent and his people, as well as the Yellowstone Forever, which is their local park partner in Yellowstone National Park, who is helping facilitate some of the work around that. And so just have a regular call, and we understand, before we release money into the account in the Park Service, that we understand that the plan is on track. We may verify it through other third parties within the park system. There's an office in Washington that handles all that kind of stuff. And so we have the confidence that it's going to go for that. And we understand that based upon the commitment that our donor made, that there will be 72 new units of housing and other, broader improvements in that complex to ensure that the housing gets done. So yeah, we have a good connection with the Park Service. Obviously, it's a little more complicated in housing. When there's land acquisition and we're buying it, we know we got it. We have the deed. There's verification there. But yeah, you make a great point. Donors are the best way to lose a donor is to not do what you say you're going to do.
Amen.
And so we make sure we understand the most likely next donor is an existing donor. And so we really take care of and steward our donors as well as we can.
Understand. So if I understand you, the National Parks Foundation then is the fiduciary. You're holding the funds and you release the funds as different steps are met.
Exactly. Yeah, we're not releasing it all 40 at once because they don't need all 40 at once.
Of course not. Yeah.
So this will be phased out over a couple of years, and we will release the money. Frankly, when Cam Shawley tells me he needs that money to basically complete the bidding process or the procurement process on his end, but not until then.
Understand. Well, you mentioned the Friends group at Yellowstone, and that leads me to another question I have on my list. You're very good. You're like throwing these right back at me, so I don't have to even remember what to ask. But you mentioned the Friends group there at Yellowstone, and many of the parks have Friends groups, and I've sat on their boards. So my question is, do you ever get conflict with these Friends groups? They're raising funds and looking for money for special projects as well, and you're doing the same. How does that work? Are there conflicts? How do you manage the conflicts, or is it synergistic?
So you're asking me the softball questions. I was hoping you were going to ask me, Don. So it's we're having a good rhythm here. Honestly, when I arrived here almost 9 years ago in my job, the relationships between the National Park Foundation and the local groups was not where it needed to be, and it was a little bit more competitive. The lines of communication were not open. Weren't really sharing the broader purpose around the parks. And so something that my team and I have really focused on since 2015 is to really create a more coherent and cohesive national parks movement, and really see ourselves as one community that are focusing in different ways on the same thing. And the same thing is the protection and enhancement of the parks and the visitor experience and the connection of people to these great places. And so we have really leaned into that as the national partner of the National Park Service, and we have certain capabilities that others don't. The other part of this down is that it's, we are incapable of executing the projects and programs without our friends groups and without the other park partners. And so it includes the 250 or so friends groups, but it also includes 70 service corps, and the importance of youth service corps around the country, environmental education groups, land trusts, historic preservation groups, all of whom play a role in one way or another on a day-to-day basis in supporting the work of these national park sites. And so we're really working hard to be better coordinated, to raise money together. We're involved in a project right now in Grand Teton National Park to raise $37 million to support the acquisition of a state school section called the Kelly parcel within Grand Teton National Park. And our partner, the Grand Teton National Park Foundation, and we did this in 2016 on the Antelope Flats project. We're doing it again now. So it's really hand in glove. Like there's no competition. I mean, it doesn't matter if the money comes to us or them. It's just going to get the project done. So once we kind of change our mentality around that, we're just seeing we're all getting more done together. And we also, Don, support the development and the building of the capacity of these organizations along the way. And so we really put a meaningful amount of money every year into helping these organizations go from where they are to where they want to be.
Well, you're really to be commended for that. I mean, during my tenure, that issue was a major problem, and some of my greatest battle scars were had as a result of friends groups being very, very frustrated by the inability to work together hand in hand. So much so that some of the parks friends groups went almost rogue and tried to develop another type of foundation that would be a lot more supportive. And I tried to mediate that during my tenure, and boy, did I run into a buzzsaw. And so I want my listeners to understand what it means to have good leadership like your leadership, and a change of mind and a change of heart, and recognize how important it is to recognize the value of these other groups and to bring them together and to work synergistically. And the foundation is to really be commended for making that happen.
Well, Don, let me also just make another point on that, which is that we have, as I mentioned earlier, that the foundation has announced is going to announce $1 billion campaign to support the parks.
Right.
We've also intentionally and actively engaged the park partner community to have it be what we're calling a collective campaign.
Mm-hmm.
We've identified 4 major areas: conservation, preservation, connecting people to parks, and really focusing on visitor experience as the 4 major categories. And they line up well with the friends groups too. And so we're working on this together. We have, we're signing MOUs with organizations to actually work intentionally with us, and we can help them develop a new, direct mail program, or engage with them on sharing a corporate partner or whatever it might be. And it's just changed the whole thing. And if we're going to raise about $1 billion, we're confident that community during the same period of time will raise more than $3 billion.
Right.
So all of a sudden you think about the impact that our organizations collectively have on the operations and enhancement of the parks and the visitor experience. It's amazing.
That's absolutely awesome. So who are some of your biggest corporate supporters in the National Parks Foundation? I see, Subaru, of course, and I know now you've got this relationship with one of the streaming services. You'll have to help me
Plus, yeah.
with that. but I know one of the streaming services is going to be focusing on national parks as well. But who are some of the supporters, both individuals, I guess, and if you can mention them, and your corporate supporters?
Sure. I think we have it's a moving target, but somewhere in the mid 70s of corporate partners right now. And we call them partners because it is a partnership in a different way than just a donation for an individual or foundation, which is strictly philanthropic. We're working with them to find the common ground where they can use our brand and we can use their brand and money to enhance both of our organization's missions. So Subaru is a big one. They're the largest corporate sponsor in the history of the national parks, and they've been generous both with their dollars to support us through their annual campaign Share the Love, as well as through indirect through media. And so there's nothing like the National Park Foundation showing on TV or on NPR or wherever it might be to build our brand and name ID over time. And it really benefits everything else that we do when we can create, one of our big goals, Don, is to have national parks be a charity of choice, that it would benefit both us and the other organizations to support parks. And so when people think about, like they do with St. Jude Hospital or, any number of boys and girls clubs, look, we want to be that kind of a charity of choice, and they can help us do that. I was just in Minneapolis last Friday and had a meeting with a senior person from General Mills, and they are the ones that are working with us with Nature Valley. And Nature Valley is a great partner. Same thing. We are on every Nature Valley granola bar. Our brand and logo is, and they put us on a lot of TV commercials. And so the gentleman told me last week that their advertising that we're a part of reaches 98.5% of the households that they're targeting. Think about that.
Amazing.
And so we're in that same demographic that cares about national parks. And so that's a wonderful thing. Coca-Cola's been our longest standing partner. They're helping us with a variety of things around trails and sustainability projects. REI was a longtime partner. LL Bean is a really important partner of ours and our lead partner in the outdoor retail sector. And they support us in a variety of ways, including focus on the future. Really, they recognize the importance of innovation in the future management and preservation of our park. So they've been a big supporter there. We've been very fortunate, Don, recently to secure a number of important philanthropic commitments from foundations. The Mellon Foundation, Andrew W. Mellon Foundation of New York, been tremendously helpful around humanities. They also made a key contribution to us for the establishment of the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Historic Park, National Monument, Mississippi and in Chicago. And they've been hugely helpful. The Pisces Foundation out of San Francisco, which is Bob and Randy Fisher, they've been hugely helpful to us, especially in our work with the park partners. They've been, providing the financial lubricant to help improve those relationships, which doesn't hurt, frankly,
That's just absolutely wonderful. You mentioned demographic here earlier, and I had Audrey Peterman, who's an advocate for parks, on earlier, and she's been lobbying me heavily to, even though I'm retired, to work with her on some projects in terms of focusing on demographics that really have never had any contact with parks, and this has been a long-standing challenge, of course, for the national parks, and they've had various programs over the years to work on that. But there are whole demographics, broadly speaking, who've never had any contact with parks. To what degree has the foundation been working to fill that gap, or to bring in some of these demographics that have never had any contacts with parks?
Well, listen, that was one of the things that was a part of our evolution of change with the Park Service itself. And in 2014, the Park Service asked us to really lead the effort around what we called Find Your Park, which was targeted multicultural millennials. Millennials are, self-identified as 45% non-white. So you're getting to the demographic in that age category that you want to. And that was a 5-year campaign, and I think we saw some movement in that category in terms of broader interest. We've also got it's interesting. It's kind of, we're coming at this in a lot of different ways, Don. I mean, that's an important, effective way, which is really a national marketing campaign. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, we're targeting Title I fourth graders to have field trip experiences in national parks. These are mostly in 12 urban areas of the country, and Title I kids have a high propensity to be of color, and they're low income, but they're also of color, and so that is coupled with a fourth grade pass, every kid outdoors pass, which gives every fourth grader and their family free access to all national parks in our country. And so we're trying to leverage these things to have African American, Latino, Asian American, indigenous families to be more connected to parks. And then some of the other things that we're doing, we have a great program that we put together a few years ago called Park Ventures, which is an effort to provide grants to emerging organizations that are all about creating community within their affinity groups around national park visits. And so Brown Girls Climb, a variety of different organizations, Outdoor Afro, Latino Outdoors are among them that you're familiar with, that are really trying to enhance the capacity and effectiveness of those organizations. They can build community within their group to visit and enjoy and appreciate and hopefully support the national parks. And so Rue Mapp is a good friend of mine. I'm sure you know Rue, and she's been a very strong supporter of that work with ours. We've had a long time partnership with Outdoor Afro, and so we're trying to be practical about it. We can't change people's minds overnight, but we can build a movement over time to help make that happen.
Right. Well, giving you fair warning, I think Audrey Peterman has another idea that's consistent with what you're talking about, and she's probably going to contact you and talk about it a little bit. It's not really revolutionary, but it's additive, I think, and I'm sure you know.
Audrey, she's always got some interesting ideas, no matter what, and she's also very effective at communicating them.
Yeah, exactly. So. You'll probably hear from her in a week or so. So I'm just giving you a heads up there. So I know we're just about out of time here, and my last question that I always love asking my guests and hearing about is: do you recall a seminal moment in nature that changed your life forever? That was perhaps what we might call transcendent.
Yeah, you gave me warning about this question, Don. So I've been thinking about it. It's sort of like, a question like, what's your favorite national park? Like, I can't pick among my children, but so I think I had more than one of these things. So I'll give you one or two. After I graduated from college, I moved up to Northern California and went to work in Sacramento briefly for the California Department of Conservation. And my girlfriend and I decided that how we wanted to see each other on the weekends was just outside of Point Reyes National Seashore, which is, I'll admit, is my favorite national park site, and largely due to the nearly 18 months of time that we shared there, and I want to say 48 out of 52 weekends, and so it was more of a period than any one moment for me. It was like a coming of age for me as a 23, 24, 25-year-old young man trying to figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. I'd gone through that phase of life where you're supported by your family, you get through college, it's all very structured, and all of a sudden, like, now it's on me. Who am I, and what am I going to do, and what's important to me, and what are my values, and spending that deep time in nature there, on the beaches, in the forests, on a bike, in a kayak, on foot, exploring and foraging and hunting and gathering, clams and fishing and whatever, like just being so deeply connected to nature over a long period of time. That was my long epiphany, I'll call it, and my long transcendence. And in terms of a specific example, I got to tell you that 2 weeks on the Grand Canyon in a raft in 1998 was probably that, and the full immersion for that time away from technology and everything, and to look at those 3 billion-year-old canyon walls and just find a inner peace and quiet. That was something else. That was a more of a concentrated experience.
Right. Well, I hope our listeners who have not visited parks will be inspired by that and take some time and visit. I was just talking to a young woman the other day, and she says, I've been meaning forever to visit the national parks. I want to visit them all. And I say, just start with one, and one step at a time. Will, I've enjoyed this. Thank you for joining us and sharing with us. And again, you're to be commended for the wonderful work you and your staff have done in bringing the foundation along and raising funds to support our national parks. Thank you on behalf of the American people. We appreciate it. Thank you for joining us on the first episode of our rebranded podcast, A Journey Through Nature and Science. This episode concludes our series on the national parks. You can listen to past episodes wherever you access your podcast. Just search for Journey Through Nature and Science, or go to our website at natureandsciencepodcast.com. Don't miss an episode by subscribing to the podcast. And if you enjoyed it, please hit the like button. As always, stay safe, share happiness, and remember, never stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing.